up!
Yes.
Subject here! Stand still.
Yes. Yes.
Stay where you are for me.
Yes.
Police, we have a warrant to search the premises, okay?
The intentions of the defendants was clearly to take payment and to carry out a crime for money. There was no ideological motivation around that, and there's no evidence to suggest that they knew who they were targeting.
The overall result of, in your case, Mr. Lavrynovych, is that you will go to prison for 7 years. The overall result in your case, Stanislav Karpurek, is that you will go to prison for 2 years. Roman Lavrynovych and Stanislav Karpurek, you can remain seated for the moment. I indicate now that I will make available a copy of these sentencing remarks to the defendants and to the press after I have delivered them. On Monday of this week, you, Roman Lavrynovych, and you, Stanislav Karpurek, were convicted on the unanimous verdict of the jury of conspiracy to commit arson, being reckless as to whether life was endangered. You, Roman Lavrynovych, were also convicted of 2 counts of damaging property, being reckless as to whether life would be endangered. It now falls to me to sentence you for those offences. Where I make findings of fact against you, I do so only when I am sure of those facts. All the findings I make will be consistent with the verdicts of the jury. The facts of this case were explored in enormous detail in this trial, and I do not need to repeat that detail here. It suffices to say this. In the early hours of 8 May 2025, you, Roman Lavrynovych, travelled by bus from your home in Sydenham. There you met a man called Petro Pochinok, to whom you had been introduced by you, Stanislav Karpurek. Mr. Pochinok had agreed to help you, but I find as a fact that he did not know what it was he was going to be helping you with. By contrast, you, Stanislav Karpurek, knew exactly what was planned. You had declined to get involved yourself in the first arson that was being contemplated, but you were perfectly prepared to recruit someone else to help Lavrynovych. You put Lavrynovych in touch with Mr. Pochinok, and your support and encouragement to him is demonstrated by the numerous calls and messages between the two of you before and after the night of the 7th-8th May. The reason you travelled that night, Roman Lavrynovych, was that you had agreed with a man you had never met and who you did not know to set fire to a car you were told would be parked in that street. You knew the man who gave you the job as EL, and you had recorded his name in your phone as L Money. You had agreed to carry out this mindless piece of arson for money. You are not a man of great principle, and you were easily bought. You did not inquire whose car it was, or why your taskmaster wanted you to set it alight. But you knew you had to film the vehicle once it was alight and send the recording to EL as proof that the job had been completed if you were to get your money. As it happened, that car used to belong to Sir Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister, but you neither knew or cared about that. You just accepted the job as you had accepted other grubby little tasks from EL before, for the cash he promised you. Once the car was alight, you handed your phone to Mr. Pochinok and asked him to film the burning. But once he realised what you were doing, he did not wish to be involved, and you obtained only 2 seconds worth of filming before he put the phone down and ran off. You followed soon afterwards. EL was not happy about your performance that night, and he sent you back to film more the following day. However, by then the car had been moved, and so you received no payment for your work. But you remained keen to earn cash any way you could. And so when EL offered you money to set fire to houses in the same part of London, you readily agreed. In the early hours of Sunday 11th of May, you travelled by bus, arriving just after 2 a.m. You sent a message to EL to confirm you were at the correct address. You then proceeded to pour an accelerant onto the steps and part of the front door and to ignite it, filming the incident as you did so. The occupant of that house was woken by an alarm, saw and smelt the smoke in the building, and had to escape by going onto the roof of the building and awaiting the arrival of the fire brigade. The following night, you carried out a similar arson attack at a different address, using a modified mixture of flammable substances. You set fire to a front door of a house on that street. That house belongs to the Prime Minister. They were abed upstairs when you set the fire. On hearing the sound of the fire being set, one of the occupants looked outside and saw smoke and an orange glow near the front door. She called 999. Smoke was coming through the door. The stairway was filling with smoke, and she could see that the smoke was getting thicker and moving upstairs. She described how the house was becoming full of smoke, and she was struggling to breathe. Her 9-year-old daughter was woken by the smoke and was terrified. Fortunately, the London Fire Brigade arrived promptly and no one was injured. I have read and will take account of the impact statements provided by the owner of the Toyota and the occupant of the house. I make it clear immediately that you will each pay the victim surcharge in the appropriate figure. Each of these offences was so serious that only a sentence of immediate imprisonment is appropriate in each of your cases. None of your counsel suggested that a pre-sentence report was necessary. I agree it is not. Some complexity to the sentencing exercise upon which I am now engaged was created by the way these matters were charged. Count 1 alleged a conspiracy to commit arson, being reckless as to whether life was endangered. And the case put forward by the prosecution in that regard was that each of the 3 defendants agreed with one or more other people that one or more of the fires should be set. That charge was therefore capable of covering the conspiracy to set all 3 fires. You, Mr. Lavrynovych, were also convicted of 2 substantive offences, counts 3 and 5, of damaging property by fire, reckless as to whether life was thereby endangered. It follows that the fires at the houses were each covered by 2 counts. I make it clear, however, that there will be no double counting in the sentence I impose. In the case of a conspiracy, I am obliged to consider carefully the position of each individual offender, and I have done so. I accept that those involved in this conspiracy played very different roles. You, Lavrynovych, were the central player and took the leading role. It was you who set each of the 3 fires. You undertook the necessary reconnaissance, and you acquired the necessary materials. You also stood to receive the largest payment. You, Stanislav Karpurek, were involved in a supporting role throughout. You helped to recruit Mr. Pochinok, and you assisted and facilitated with the payments that were anticipated. I have decided that the correct approach is to sentence each of you for the conspiracy, imposing a sentence in each case that reflects your total criminality. In your case, Mr. Lavrynovych, the sentences for counts 3 and 5 will therefore be made concurrent to that I impose on count 1. I turn then to your individual circumstances and deal first with you, Lavrynovych. The guidelines for this offence discriminate between cases where there was recklessness and cases where there was intent to endanger life. Count 1, like all those of which you were found guilty, falls into the former, identified in the guidelines as culpability B. I have then to consider the harm caused or risked. In respect of the burning of the Toyota RAV car, there was significant physical harm to property in that the car, which was worth about £17,500, was completely destroyed. In addition, there was a significant risk of harm to passers-by or nearby residents from a vehicle set alight at night in the street. I turn next to counts 3 and 5. You said in evidence, Mr. Lavrynovych, that you had been told and that you believed that each of those houses was unoccupied. I have no hesitation in rejecting that suggestion. There is no evidence other than your word that you were told any such thing, and you only had to look around the street you were in to realise that these premises were obviously residential and that the overwhelming likelihood was that they would be occupied at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. But you really did not care about that. I accept that you did not intend to put lives of the occupants at risk, but it is my conclusion that on both occasions you were utterly reckless about the risk you were creating. The obvious possibility was that there were people inside, as proved to be the case, and that setting alight their front door in the middle of the night risked exposing them to fire and or the smoke from the fire and or making it difficult for them to escape. I accept that you were not the instigator of these attacks. You were acting on the instructions of EL. But you were happy to do whatever he wanted, regardless of who he was, who he worked for, or what his motivation was. You gave no thought whatsoever to the consequences of your actions. You were to EL a useful idiot, a fool who could be manipulated to EL's advantage. You were used by EL to advance some agenda or cause of which you knew nothing. You were essentially acting as a pawn for some unknown cause and putting the lives of people asleep in their beds at risk as a result. In my view, each of the arsons of property was more serious than the burning of a car to a risk of serious physical or psychological harm. Although viewed in the round, this case comes close to a Category 1 case, I am just persuaded that it does not quite reach that level and treat it as a Category 2 case, but one close to the top of Category 2. The guidelines provide that the starting point for a culpability Category B, harm Category 2 case is 4 years, and the range is 2 to 6 years imprisonment. The aggravating features in your case, Mr. Lavrynovych, were these. Your criminality encompassed 3 arson attacks, as I have described. You undertook the necessary reconnaissance and the acquisition of necessary materials. You set each of the fires. You stood to receive the largest payment. The offence occurred at night. There was a significant degree of planning and premeditation, although this was far from a sophisticated conspiracy, and I accept that the plan evolved with EL's requests. 3 arsons were not intended at the outset. And finally, there was the use of an accelerant at each of the fires. The mitigating features in your case are these. You were aged just 21 at the date of the offending, and you are immature for your age. You had no previous convictions, cautions or reprimands recorded against you, either here or in Ukraine. In fact, you had never had any dealings with the police before your arrest in May 2025. You were motivated, at least in part, by the need for money to send to your father, who was in need of medical treatment in Ukraine. When these events occurred, you were yourself very short of money, to the point where you could not always feed yourself properly. You are a man of significantly low-level intellectual functioning, as explained in the report of Dr. Mazda Biji, and are somewhat vulnerable as a result. And finally, I accept that you are ashamed of your conduct and have shown some genuine remorse. In my judgment, the appropriate sentence on count 1 for you is 7 years imprisonment. There will be concurrent sentences of 4 years imprisonment on counts 2 and 3. Roman Lavrynovych, stand up. The overall result in your case, Mr. Lavrynovych, is that you will go to prison for 7 years. You will serve up to 4 years, 8 months in custody, and will then be released and serve the remainder on licence. You must keep to the terms of your licence and commit no further offences, or you will be liable to be recalled, and you may then serve the rest of your sentence in custody. Sit down. Stanislav Kopurik, you were found guilty of a conspiracy to commit arson, being reckless as to whether life was endangered. I find on the facts that the conspiracy to which you were a party was an agreement between you, Lavrynovych, and EL to set fire to the Toyota RAV whilst it was parked, and then to set fires at the 2 residential addresses to which I have referred. This was a case of recklessness, not intention to endanger life. As I indicated in respect of Roman Lavrynovych, I find that this was a culpability category B, harm category 2 case, but the harm was towards the upper end of the range. The aggravating features of your case were these. Your criminality encompassed 3 arson attacks, as I have just described. The offences all occurred at night. There was the use of an accelerant at each of the fires. There was a significant degree of planning and premeditation, although I accept that your involvement was limited, as I have already described. The mitigating features are these. You are aged just 22. You had no previous convictions or warnings. You did not carry out the burning of the car, and it was not your idea to burn it. You were not directly involved in the setting fire to either of the 2 houses. Your involvement was limited to encouraging and supporting Roman Lavrynovych with phone calls and messages, helping to recruit Mr. Pochinok as someone who might be willing to assist in the burning of the car, although as it turned out he did not do so, and most significantly, as the man responsible for trying to collect the money offered for these crimes. Further, you gave what was a substantially true account, particularly as to the involvement of Mr. Pochinok, when interviewed by police at Luton Airport, and you admitted on that occasion that you had, quote, made a mistake, close quotes. You did not seek financial reward for your involvement and were never promised more than £100. Your involvement was prompted, at least in part, by a wish to help Lavrynovych in his efforts to obtain money to pay for his father's medical treatment. Finally, you were throughout in employment where you were well regarded by your employer. In my judgment, taking all those matters into account, the appropriate sentence on count 1 for you is one of 2 years imprisonment. Stanislav Kopiuk, stand up. The overall result in your case, Stanislav Kopiuk, is that you will go to prison for 2 years. You will serve up to 1 year in custody, and you will then be released and serve the remainder on licence. You must keep to the terms of your licence and commit no further offences, or you'll be liable to be recalled, and you may then serve the rest of your sentence in custody. The 2 defendants can go down.